In the book of Ephesians, the Apostle Paul wrote that Yeshua has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances. Wow. Does this mean that Yeshua abolished the Torah, the Old Testament law? Well, our guest today is D. Thomas Lancaster, who has just finished a new commentary on Ephesians that answers this and other pressing questions about some of Paul's most difficult material. Messiah Podcast is brought to you by First Fruits of Zion, providing Messianic Jewish teaching for Christians and Jews.
Put your hand in mine together. We will walk in harmony. Let me introduce you to my teacher, the rabbi from the Galilee.
Welcome back to Messiah Podcast, where Jesus is Jewish and that changes everything. I'm Damian, here with my co-host, Jacob Franzak. How are you, sir? Today, Jacob, my friend, got a live guest back on the podcast.
Yeah, it's nice to be back with a real human being that's not just the two of us. Yeah, I'm doing okay. Summer's been okay here. It hasn't been too hot, and we've gotten plenty of rain. The problem is that means we're going to have a lot of garden fruit to go pick, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to get roped into that. So keep me in your prayers so I don't get heat stroke out there.
It's Michigan, man. I live in Georgia. Don't talk to me about hot.
I know.
That doesn't work. You don't get the light. You don't have the luxury.
I'm just not acclimated to the heat.
It's all in the mind, Jacob. Anyway, our guest today, Daniel Lancaster. He is the Director of Education. You may know him as D. Thomas Lancaster from many of the books that he has written. He's just finished a commentary on Ephesians that answers so many questions about that epistle because, guess what? Paul can be difficult to understand sometimes, especially when you don't have any real clue of the context of who Paul is and who he's writing to and why he's saying the things he does. But, Ephesians is difficult. Abolish the law of commandments expressed in ordinances. What is one new man? Does Paul mean to say that there's absolutely no room in the church for Jewish practice, Jacob? Is Judaism dead? I
hope not.
I mean, is that what Paul is telling us in this book?
Yeah, so these are, I was thinking about this. Some of the verses, so if you take on a Messianic Jewish perspective, I think that makes the whole Bible 1,000 times easier to understand. So much falls into place, so much finally makes sense. However, there are 10 verses or 20 verses that suddenly get much harder. And you have to go back and take a closer look at them and see, well, is this a translation issue? Is there some context that's missing? And what Dan has done is he's found all this information on these verses in Ephesians specifically. He's put together this really helpful commentary that's written at a level pretty much anyone can understand, but it's still informed by all this great academic work, this relatively recent academic work that's being done on Ephesians.
I'm incredibly humbled by the fact that you just said 10 or 20 difficult verses to understand. I think you're much smarter than me. I struggle with many more than 20. But anyway, Ephesians, for us Messianic types who plant our flag on the ongoing relevance and application of Torah, it can be a bit tricky to navigate this without proper background. So, for a long time, this epistle has been interpreted as Yeshua ending the law because he tore it down, which I'm incredibly excited to explore with Daniel. As I said, Daniel is all of the great things he is at First Fruits of Zion. He is the author of the phenomenal Messianic Jewish commentaries called Torah Club. We also have a phenomenal small group community, Bible study community that's based on Torah Club, and we're getting ready to launch a new Torah Club that he's currently writing. It's called Beginning of Wisdom. He's the pastor of Beth Emmanuel in Hudson, Wisconsin, and has influenced your hosts, Jacob and myself, on such a deep level with along with probably a whole heck of a lot of people who read and listen to his erudite interpretations of the greatest story ever told. We're blessed to call him a colleague, a fellow disciple, and a friend. And Daniel, generally speaking, is just a downright good dude. So let's get to it and learn something about Ephesians.
If you want to know the Jewish Jesus, don't miss out on a free subscription to Messiah Magazine, where you'll discover his life and teaching, learn about the biblical festivals, and get connected with Israel. Subscribe for free at messiahmagazine.org. Messiah Magazine is a free, donation-supported quarterly publication of First Fruits of Zion.
Welcome, Daniel. Long time no talk. Actually, I think we probably talked this morning in some meeting at First Fruits of Zion, but welcome back. How are you, sir?
Well, thank you. It's a privilege to be on the podcast with you guys.
We have a lot of difficult subject matter to tackle here because there's, as we were talking about in the intro, there is often a large amount of confusion around Paul and what he's really trying to say. Paul commentary on Paul and his writings is no new thing for you, though.
No, me and Paul, we're buds now.
You guys
good.
go way back.
Yeah, no, we had our difficulties early on. You know, we didn't always get along, but you know, we've worked things out. We're good.
Good. Was that in the process of writing the Galatians commentary? I mean, we know why you chose Galatians, because Paul there also has a lot to say about the law and Jewish identity, and it's a great starting point, a jumping off point to talk about a lot of different stuff.
Yep.
Messianic Judaism. But so that was Galatians, makes sense. What brought you to Ephesians? Why this one?
Yeah. Okay. So, well, I mean, I guess the why Galatians is just self-evident, because if you're talking about Messianic Judaism, everybody's like, okay, have you read Galatians? You know? Oh, so you're saying the Torah is not canceled? Well, have you read Galatians? Right? So, I mean, you had to do Galatians. We had to answer Galatians. But Ephesians, I took on Ephesians. It wasn't random. What drew me to Ephesians, to open up Ephesians and start talking about Ephesians with people, is the seemingly never-ending Gentile identity crisis that we see in Messianic Jewish circles, in Messianic synagogues, and among Jewish roots people. You know, it's like under the auspices of replacement theology. You know, back in the day in the church, you didn't have identity crisis. Nobody has it. You have a very simple identity. You're a Christian. You're the people of God, the chosen people, the new Israel. You know, it's a very, very comfortable identity, right? Mm-hmm. But post-supersessionism comes and pulls that rug out from under everybody's feet, and you know, you get like, whoa, Israel is still God's people. Israel is still in the nation. Is still a nation. You know, the Jewish people are still the chosen people, and so then people start to like. That's an exciting thought for about 60 seconds. And then people start to think, oh, where does that leave me? You know, and it's like the first thought must be like, well, I must be Israel, you know, or I'm not Israel. Then who am I? And then the next thing is like, wait a second. Now I feel like a second-class citizen, right? I mean, I think we've all heard that. Mm-hmm. And then what happens next is it inspires all sorts of anti-Jewish behavior and anti-Jewish theology, such as one law theology, you know, and so it's like it starts to come out all sideways. But also, you know, I pastor a Messianic Jewish synagogue where these things are happening in real time.
Right.
So it's not just theoretical for me. So I was watching, you know, many of these brothers and sisters always circling around the same issues, like they're caught in some sort of theological loop, like a dog chasing its tail, you know, and you know, it's like just keeps going through this process of like, oh, the Jewish people. Wait, I'm not Jewish. Who am I? I feel like a second-class citizen. Oh, the Jewish people. Wait, I'm not Jewish. Who am I? And it's like just the hand-wringing, the endless hand-wringing. And I knew that Ephesians has the solution to this problem. So, let's talk about Ephesians.
Yeah.
Solutions. I like that word, because that is the number one dilemma that never, ever, ever goes away in Messianic Jewish space.
Yep.
Where do I fit in?
Yeah. Well, and you're kind of killing a couple birds with one stone here, because not only are you answering that question, but it seems to me, after reading your commentary, which I love, it's like almost that these are the same problems that the Ephesians had. And that's why Paul wrote the letter. Like the Ephesians is tailor-made to address the problem of Ephesian people saying, well, what if I'm not part of the thing? What am I? I'm not like a descendant of Abraham or whatever. So I'm just some jerk from Ephesus. I'm not in the Old Testament anywhere. Like I've just been dropped into this thing, from a helicopter. So what am I? And so is that basically the problem that the Ephesians had? Like why he wrote the letter to them in the first place?
I think that's 100%. I think you nailed it. I think it's a sociological problem that Paul's dealing with the same problem I'm dealing with here. In Galatians, Paul was trying to solve something other. The Gentiles were hitting this sociological problem, the same sociological problem of the I'm not Jewish problem. And their solution in Galatians was, problem solved. I'll just become Jewish. Circumcision, conversion. Yeah. I'm not Jewish. I can fix that, right? Mm-hmm. And Paul says, no. He says, that's not an option for the Gentile disciple of Yeshua, right? And so where does that leave the Gentile disciple? Now me sad again, then Ephesians is like the sequel to that. It's like, no, here's why, here's the orientation, here's what I want you to see. I think that's, but there's another problem that Paul's also addressing in Ephesians, which is related and no less significant. And that is the persecution, I think, that the Ephesian Gentiles are experiencing from the Diana cult, which we see the roots of that in the book of Acts, right? That's a major concern in Ephesus and in all of Paul's communities. It's a major concern of this sort of contest between the God of Israel and the gods to whom these people, these Gentiles, actually originally belonged before they came under Paul's sphere of influence and the influence of the apostolic community. That's just under the surface.
Yeah, and it's hard to put our heads in that space because we don't always feel that conflict between where we came from and our nationality or whatever, and the demands of being a follower of Yeshua.
I have to ask a question that many scholars want me to ask you, though they didn't tell me that. I just know they want me to ask you this.
Yeah.
Pauline authorship of the book of Ephesians. There is some disagreement about whether or not Paul actually wrote this letter. You believe that he did. You obviously are confident in that. Tell me why.
Okay, well, I don't find the critical academic approach to the New Testament to be incredibly useful. I often find the arguments to be built on some false premises. A lot of times, and unless we look at a specific argument to say, well, here's why, then we could address those. But a lot of times, what you have is the scholar makes some certain assumptions about Paul and what Paul's about. Okay, so he says, oh, well, Paul was against the law. So that's right. Paul was against the law, and he was he believed that he was starting a new religion, and Judaism was done away with. All right, so then we come to something like maybe in Ephesians we find a perspective that doesn't support all of those premises that the scholar has started with about Paul. his false premises about Paul. So he says, here, look at this. This doesn't line up with what we know to be true about Paul. Therefore, it's pseudepigraphical. It's been written by somebody in Paul's name. And so then once we reach that conclusion, then we start picking apart the Greek and say, look, Paul never uses this particular construction of this word anywhere else. And, it's like,
right.
And that's, honestly, that's above my pay grade, but I just don't find these arguments to be incredibly compelling. And they stand against the weight of the tradition that we have received from the apostolic era. From early on. These letters were circulating so quickly, so fast, so quickly, and among so many communities that if you're to introduce, and people did try, they tried to introduce fake Pauline writings. Like, I don't know if you've heard of the epistle to Laodicea, that's, and they do stand out as like, that's not Paul. Come on, nice try, but I don't know. I guess that's probably not a great answer for you, but I'm just not persuaded. And I don't find it helpful to it from a devotional perspective, from a pastoral perspective, to say to my peeps, we don't really know if Paul wrote this, but presuming that it still has something of value for us, let's open it up and
right.
Yeah, well, and that makes sense. A lot of these guys, like you said, they're starting out with. For a while, the Germans were saying Paul only wrote 4 of these things. And the pendulum, thankfully, has swung back a little bit the other way to say, well, more than that, And I think the better we understand Paul, I think these things will come into more focus and clarity. There's this like tendency to start out with the most possible doubt and work from there, which,
that's the critical method. That's why we call it the critical method. It's like you start assuming 0, and build from there. But
and that's fine if people want to do that. I think they'll come around eventually, right? And even if not, we have, like you said, we have early traditions for a lot of this stuff.
Early attestation.
Early attestation. And like super early manuscripts for a lot of them too. But anyway, so about Ephesus in particular, right? I think it's easy to miss this, like if you're not paying really close attention when you read Acts. But Paul usually rolls into town and leaves after like a Shabbat or a couple Shabbats or like 3 Shabbats. He's not always like hanging around, but in Ephesus, he sticks around in Ephesus for like 2 years or something. And I always wondered, and since you've done all the research and legwork for this book, maybe you could answer me, what was special about Ephesus? Like his horse breakdown, or why did he hang out in Ephesus for so long? What makes Ephesus a special place in the ancient world? He was more effective use of his time there than anywhere else.
Did his horse break down?
I don't know. I've always thought when Paul says the Holy Spirit prevented us, I always picture like a flat tire. And Paul's like, it's all God, everything that comes into your life is from Hashem, and you got to have a munah,
Did you say his horse sprained his ankle?
Yes.
Got dehydrated? I don't know.
Yeah, he's there a couple of years in Ephesus, right? So, look, I think Ephesus is the intellectual and cultural social center of Asia Minor. You got the great library at Ephesus, right? It's the center of that Aegean world. And, outside of Rome, I would think it would be a primary target for anybody who is hoping to exert some sort of social influence on or broader territorial influence. And so it just strategically makes a lot of sense for Paul to set up shop there in Ephesus. And it seems like he's got a strong community in Ephesus, like a strong community of support that he can rely on. So he's there a few years until he's driven out by the Diana cult.
I want to ask, like, the just getting started with some of the confusions. This is a foundational confusion, though, because all the times that you can read, well, any number of things, if you're not really paying attention to what you're reading, even down to pronouns, you can, and we won't talk about pronouns too much. It's kind of a weird topic these days, amazingly. Who would have ever even thought pronouns could be controversial? But there is a grammatical clue that has been skipped over millions of times in Ephesians, I think. He starts out saying, God has blessed us in Christ, in Messiah. We have redemption through his blood. He's made known to us the mystery of his will, and so on and so forth. But then mysteriously in verse 13, it says, you also. So it's about us, but then you also. So if one is not paying attention, then there's possibly some confusion about the you and us, because you is different than us. Who are the us and the you in the first chapter of Ephesians, and why is this very important, understanding the rest of what is being said in Ephesians?
Okay, yeah, this pronoun thing, and we don't mean, to make an issue out of pronouns in the woke sense of
right,
making an issue out of pronouns, but this really is important. This is the key to unlocking the meaning of the whole epistle. It's in the pronouns here in the first chapter, and this is something that for years and years and years, reading Ephesians, I read right over it.
Me too.
It absolutely didn't register to me one little bit that he switches from the first person, a first person plural form, in fact, us, we,
Mm-hmm.
to a second person plural form, you. It absolutely, really made no impact on me. I just figured, he's talking to the people in Ephesus, right?
Right.
It's like us apostles talking to people in Ephesus. If I even thought that far about it, I don't think I even thought that far about it. I just more likely just read Bible verses, but here's what happened. And I have to give you a little bit of a story of how we cracked this code. First Fruits of Zion was going to start this, I don't know how many years ago now, maybe 10 years ago now, we were going to publish a Siddur. Yeah, theoretically, we're still going to do it. We're still going to publish a Messianic Jewish Siddur. But some 10 years ago, we thought we'd have it done in about a year. And
I remember that.
Yeah, right. So Aaron Eby had the job of translating, compiling, and creating this very innovative Messianic Jewish Siddur, which was originally going to, just kind of be Siddur light, and carry also some New Testament inspired types of Messianic type of material in it. And so as he was putting together these, this Messianic material that we were theoretically going to put into the Siddur, he was asking for suggestions. And I think Toby had suggested this first bracha passage in Ephesians, where it starts, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Master Yeshua the Messiah, who has blessed us with every spiritual blessing in heavenly places in Messiah," and so forth, and goes on for quite a way, as you know, because that's a bracha. That's a classic. It's formulated in the classic liturgical style, following the same model as a bracha from a regular synagogue type of blessing, right?
Yeah. It
Okay, so
definitely sounds like it belongs in the Siddur.
Yeah, sounds like it could belong in a Messianic Siddur. So the first thing Aaron had to do was then, was to translate this to Hebrew and figure out how it would function in a Messianic Siddur. And as he was working on this, he took special note of these pronouns and how it starts off, blessed be Hashem, who has blessed us with every blessing in heavenly places, just as he chose us and predestined us to the adoption of sons and so forth. And he noticed the sudden dramatic shift from these big sweeping us statements to the you also statements that begin in verse 13. You also, after listening to the message of truth. And he said, oh, you know what this is? The us here, Paul is speaking of Israel. And the you also, he is speaking of the Gentile disciples. And that, once you get that, you realize, whoa, that just opened up the whole meaning of the rest of the book of Ephesians.
Yeah.
That is the Rosetta Stone to the book of Ephesians. And so that's how we arrived at that.
Fairly important.
Yeah, fairly important.
I do want to push just a little bit. I want to bring up a point of argument that someone would make, is that he sort of switches back when you get into 2, and there's a lot to talk about in 2, when all of a sudden he's saying, you were dead through the trespasses and sins, and then in 2:3 he's saying, all of us once lived among them in the passions of our flesh, but God, who's rich in mercy, which he loved us. That's the critical objection to what we're presenting here in these pronouns. How would you address that?
When he switches back to the us?
Yeah.
I think when he switches back to the us, he's making the point that we too, the Jewish people, the apostolic community, specifically among the Jewish people, the apostolic community as a representation of the Jewish people, we too needed salvation in Messiah. We too needed this regeneration and this new hope and this new life that comes through faith in Messiah, the forgiveness of sins. We too needed to be made alive. So I don't think it's a contradiction at all. Instead, it just follows the same formula.
And I guess the end point of that objection is to say, see, Paul is saying that we're all us, that there's no longer any distinction. He's grouping himself and all Jews in that way, that there's no longer. And that's not true.
Right. The rest of the epistle doesn't bear that out. If that was the point. Instead, what he's trying to do is he's trying to create the rhetoric that he's employing is trying to create this sense of commonality. Like, look, we have this in common.
Yeah.
We are fellow heirs of the faith, and so. But he will go on to make distinctions, saying you're being built on the foundation of the prophets and the apostles and so forth.
Yeah.
This sounds familiar to me, because I remember thinking something similar about Romans. Was it when I was trying to read Romans early days from a Messianic Jewish perspective? And I remember thinking, man, when you tease out the groups here and figure out what Paul is saying about the Jewish people, what Paul is saying about Gentiles, it is like, okay, here's a bunch of things that are different, and here's something that's the same. We all had a problem that through Messiah, Hashem is fixing, or has fixed, or will fix.
Yeah.
So I think this us, you, we progression is not just a Rosetta Stone for Ephesians, but maybe for a lot of the rest of the Pauline corpus, because he talks about this to everybody. He's always talking about this sociological problem. It seems like, there's a lot of other problems, but it seems like he usually has something to say about this issue, because it was an issue that all of his communities faced.
Right. It is an issue that all of his communities face. He refers to himself as the apostle to the Gentiles, and this is the number one Gentile issue. Once the Gentile has become a disciple of Yeshua, this is the number one issue, is this question of, okay, where do I fit into the kingdom? Because I'm not Jewish. And you got to think of what the social pressure must have been like, just amazing social pressure of, because everybody else is loyal to the gods. You're not loyal to the gods anymore. What, have you become a Jew?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no,
Yeah.
not exactly. It's just puts them in a very awkward position.
I think Paul Fredrickson called it cultural treason.
Yes.
It's just like these are people who are doing something that's taboo. They're doing something that upsets the gods.
Exactly.
They're not fulfilling their responsibility.
And your city's going to suffer.
Yeah.
Ephesus is going to suffer if you make, Diana, Artemis, Apollo, Athena, whoever, if you make them mad.
Exactly.
So you don't do that.
Yeah, yeah. So all you need is one little earthquake, and
Right.
or what was it? Felt like Douglas Adams says, like one sheep gets born with two heads, or anything bad happens to anybody, and it's like, oh, who's upset the gods? It's these people. Yeah,
Yeah, it's these traitors who have left the worship of the gods and are now worshiping this foreign Jewish god. And so the Romans referred to them as atheists and haters of human beings, because of their defection. And so, right, then when there was a fire in Rome, who gets blamed? It's obviously the disciples. It's obviously these defectors. And so that's why you had the persecution. The first Neronian persecution began not long after this epistle's written, right? About a decade later.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I think it's important to note that it would have been okay for these people to go worship the God of Israel as long as they kept worshiping the gods of their places they were in, or their ancestors, the other obligations that they had. Because, like everyone was a polytheist, right?
Yeah.
The really strange thing that Paul's introducing is Jewish monotheism. Like that's kind of the innovation here that's really disrupting everybody's lives, right?
Right. Yeah, monotheism is the big problem, and also this repudiation of images is really offensive, especially there in Ephesus, where the economy is a big part of the tourist economy is resting on selling these little images of Diana.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
was that the question back then too? What about the economy?
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Follow the money.
Wow.
Serious disciples want to get past shallow teaching, understand their Bibles, and know Jesus better. Torah Club is a small group Bible study where disciples learn the Bible from a Jewish perspective through in-depth discussions and good fellowship. Start a club or join a club today at torahclub.org. Torah Club is where disciples learn.
Well, I think probably the first real speed bump in Ephesians, if you're just gliding through it and you're trying to keep your Messianic Jewish perspective, the first thing that's going to jolt you out of your car if you're not wearing your seatbelt here is this verse in chapter 2, where it pretty much just seems to say Jesus abolished the law. It says it in a really strange way. It says it with a lot of different words in English, at least, it's a pretty awkward grammatical construction. Yeshua abolished the law of commandments expressed in ordinances. But no matter how you read it, it seems like he's saying, okay, the Old Testament law is gone. So I guess first of all, in case someone's clicked on this and this is the first Messianic Jewish thing they've ever heard about, or they're like a first-time podcast listener, can you explain just briefly, why can we not just say, okay, let me Paul abolished the Old Testament law? Like why is that interpretation a huge problem for like the rest of the Bible and the rest of everything and understanding Jesus and all of that? And I guess the second part is, if that's not what he's saying there, what is he saying?
Yeah. Okay. That is probably the most difficult passage in Ephesians. And I like the way that you framed the question, because you're basically pointing out, like, look, this verse, if this verse says what it sounds like it says, then it's contradicting the rest of the Bible, so it's like, it's kind of like, this is one of those 10 or 20 verses you were talking about. That's like, it's them against the rest of the Bible, and so.
Yeah. Well, I thought about this as a younger person. I'm like, God comes down on a mountain. Somehow the invisible God is in a certain way visible, and people go up and eat, and they see the sapphire floor, and they hear the voice from the mountain, and they see the lightning, or they hear the lightning somehow. There's so many miracles happen at Mount Sinai, and God says, this is all the stuff, never forget it, you have to do it forever. And then a couple thousand years ago, someone writes a letter, and so that's the weight of the evidence, right? We have the entire Sinai event with millions of people see this incredible thing, and then we have a guy writes a letter. And so like, if you had to pick one, and they do disagree, Paul's got a problem, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Paul's got to go. So that's a funny way to put it. But you're absolutely right. If that's says what people say it says, and likewise, if Galatians means what people say Galatians means, then it stands against the Torah, it stands against Moses, who's called the greatest prophet, the one that God knows face to face, to whom he speaks clearly, not in riddles, stands against the testimony of the rest of the prophets, the testimony of the Psalms and the testimony of Proverbs. Basically the whole Bible, all the way into the New Testament, stands against the testimony of our master Yeshua, who says, don't think that I've come to abolish the Torah. I haven't come to abolish the Torah. Not the smallest stroke of a pen, not a jot or tittle will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished, right? And is when you think about that verse, even as disciples of Yeshua, we're not even allowed to think that. We shouldn't even be allowed to think that, he says. So it's like, how much less to build a whole theological system that abolishes the Torah. But, all of that, we still haven't solved the problem of this verse. So what does this verse mean, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so the passage in question. Well, we have translation problems, first of all. Our translators are unintentionally, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Our English translators are unintentionally assuming a replacement theology paradigm. So they're seeing Ephesians 2:14-15 as just more evidence of what is patently obvious to them already, and that's that the Torah is canceled and Judaism is done away with, and the Jewish people are no longer, the chosen people. And so they have no problem just translating the awkward Greek into English that way. So English Standard Version just puts it, by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances. Or the New International Version puts it, abolishing in his flesh the law with its commandments and regulations. Which that's, wow, if that's what your Bible says, that's pretty straightforward, right? I mean, there's not a lot of confusion on what that means. But that's not what the text says. So in the book, I urge our readers to compare the far more literal rendering of the Greek that you get in the King James Version. So in the good old trusty King James. King James is actually a very good translation. It's because it's so wooden. It's so strict to so very literal in the way that it handles the Greek. So, which makes it hard to understand, But it's a solid translation in that regard. So King James puts it this way. It says, "For he is our peace, who hath made both one, and hath broken down the middle wall of partition between us, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in ordinances, for to make in himself of twain one new man, so making peace." All right, so that's King James. I'm not sure that helped anyone, but
there's an extra couple of words in there for sure. This enmity idea, right?
Right, exactly. It's what's being abolished here. It's not the law. It's the enmity between the twain, between the twain. So the enmity between Jews and Gentiles. So the odd phrase law of commandments contained in ordinances then needs to be understood as the halakhic argument over Jewish-Gentile interaction within the assembly of Messiah, which is an argument that we don't have to speculate about. We don't have to just infer that it existed. That's a halakhic legal Torah argument that we see coming up frequently in the book of Acts and in Paul's epistles. And it has to do with the boundaries of table fellowship and purity concerns. So we saw this in Galatians. We see this in Acts 15. The Torah is engendering this, what you could call a sort of enmity between Israel and the idolatrous Gentile world to protect the set apart status of the Jewish people. And every commandment and ordinance then in the Torah is marking out the parameters of who Israel is and who Israel is not. Israel being God's chosen people, his treasured possession, while the nations belong to, Paul puts it, he says in Ephesians here, he says, to the prince of the power of the air, right? And so the Torah comes and creates this dividing wall between these two people groups, the Jewish people on the one side, the Gentiles on the other side. But what if, and this is the problem he's trying to solve, what if the Gentiles were to cross over that wall? What if they were to abandon idolatry, abandon their gods, cast their allegiance with the king of Israel? Well, in that case, do we still need that wall of separation? And from this perspective, Ephesians 2:14 and 15 isn't contradicting the master's words. It's not contradicting the Torah. Instead, it's indicating that the disciples of Yeshua have been brought past this metaphoric dividing wall that was separating the Jewish people and non-Jewish people on opposite sides of the fence, that in Messiah, he himself is our peace, making the twain one new man. All right. So that's the gist of how we would understand this passage. It's not a cancellation of the Torah. Rather, it's a cancellation of the separation, the enmity between Jews and Gentiles within the Messianic Jewish community.
Phenomenally clear explanation. Again, radically important to understand. I think some of the most Ephesians 2 contains possibly one of the most important foundations for Jews and Gentiles being in a Messianic synagogue together. When he's talking about, in Christ Jesus, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. That's about as good as it gets if you're a Gentile to understand the power, the mission, the accomplishment of Yeshua for those who were worshiping Diana, Artemis, Apollo. I mean, this is phenomenally important to understand these identities.
Yeah, and it gets to the heart of that Gentile identity crisis that we were talking about earlier. It's like, no, okay, second-class citizen, whatever. How about annexed people? How about conquered people? We are, as Gentiles, we are the conquered people of King Messiah who have been rescued. That's an amazing thing. We have this amazing role to play. We're the trophy. We're like the trophy bride of Messiah. That he stole from the nations. I mean, it's not a throwaway identity. It's like the whole point of the redemption is, for God so loved the world that he sent his only son. Right?
It was probably the most profound miracle for the Acts guys. Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
this is bigger than us.
Yeah, this is bigger than us. This is absolutely mind-blowing and paradigm changing for them in the apostolic community.
And when we're talking about Pauline authorship, just having that discussion, these types of statements and Paul's focus on this, to me, is the thing that really sort of cements. This is Paul's heart. This is his entire mission. This is he was made for this, and so he's speaking it in these amazing, these beautiful words about identity. It creates some dilemma, though, also, and let's talk about Messianic Judaism and continue on this identity thing. Many people read that as the destruction of distinction, that when you read the term one new man, that there's now no, and we bring in then other Pauline statements about, there's no Jew or Greek, there's no, that Paul is basically saying, no, Jesus did away with every single distinction. We're all Jews now in some way. I mean, like now you're one new man, but not really Jewish because I don't like Judaism anymore. And so we're just this amorphous thing that Jesus made by knocking this wall down.
It's
right.
That's third confusing. Race idea, right? Not Jew, not Gentile, but some new
some new
Right.
thing that
Yeah.
looks like Gentiles.
Right. And we have a name for that. We have that's called replacement theology.
Got it.
That is replacement theology. That's the idea that, okay, so Jewish identity no longer really has, maybe it still exists on some sort of ethnic level or something like that, but it no longer has any sort of spiritual or legal significance within the body of Messiah. Instead, it's been, there's this conflation that's happened between the Gentile disciples and the Jewish people. And so there's no longer any distinction between the two. And it's really super easy to get to that position because, first of all, it's just sort of intuitive. That's just sort of naturally intuitive, especially for Americans who, we're like, we have this sort of like this idea of, the melting pot where all cultures, I know that's no longer politically correct to talk about the melting pot, but it's also no longer politically correct to talk about replacement theology. So it's sort of intuitive on the one hand. On the other hand, you can string together, about 6 different Pauline verses to come to that conclusion and just beat that drum over and over. It's one new man. It's one new man. But as Rabbi Schiffman likes to point out, why is the one new man never circumcised? I mean, it ultimately is the end of Judaism and the Jewish people. And it's certainly not what Paul is saying. It does not, the rest of the epistle doesn't bear that out. Instead, there has to be the two in order for it to be significant at all, that they are one in Messiah. Oneness is just not sameness, not in this sense.
That's one of my favorite Lancasterisms, by the way. I quote it all the time. Oneness is not sameness. That's such a fundamental thing to keep in mind as you read through the apostolic writings. It really is.
Yeah, it's also really good advice for marriage. There is no difference between Jew and Greek, male and female. But guess what? What did the French say? Vive la difference.
Talking about the enmity, when you said that word from the King James, it got me, the thing that popped into my head, and I didn't send you this question in advance, and I'm sorry. The thing that popped into my head was the enmity from the first part of Galatians, where Paul recounts this story of how the Jewish and Gentile believers, disciples, were eating together, and Peter was there, and then some people from James came, and Peter got cold feet, and he stopped eating with the Gentile disciples. And is Paul thinking about that kind of stuff? Like, if you can't even eat with somebody because your whole theology says that they're gross, or unclean or polluted. I mean, there's a lot of words for idolatry and idolaters in Judaism, and to have people say, well, even if they, I don't know what the people from James actually said. These Gentiles had abandoned idolatry, but for some reason there was that perception lingered, right? There was still this. Well, are they okay though? Like, are they?
Yeah. Well,
have they been cleansed?
Exactly. Now, that's exactly the issue. That's exactly, and those are the types of incidents. That's what Paul is talking about. And that's what I mean when I say it's a legal, the ordinances, the law contained in ordinances. We're talking in the language of halakha, of Jewish law. And so the problem that the men from James are suffering it's not even some sort of like bigotry, not necessarily like they have some sort of bigotry or something like that, or, racial prejudice. It's Jewish law that the Jewish, the halakhic legal interpretation of the Torah is saying, look, we're going to protect your ritual purity status by making an ordinance, a law that says don't eat with Gentiles. Right. And so even if they think, oh, you know what, these Gentiles, they're totally kosher. They're brothers and sisters in Messiah. But, hey, the law is the law. I got it. So I can't eat with you. I'm sorry. It's like, you guys sit over there. We'll sit over here. It's all good. We'll put a mechitza between us.
Oh, no.
That's what is going on. And Paul's saying, no, the mechitza has been removed in Messiah. This is in regard to these sorts of things. We can no longer put these Gentile disciples into the same halakhic legal category as an idolater. They need to be moved into a different category. And so, yeah, you're exactly right in pulling out that incident.
You like Joe Good, right? You remember Joe?
I do. Yeah, Yossi Tov.
I like Joe. I think Joe, somewhere along the lines, I read something about him drawing the ordinances specifically directed toward the massive fight that the houses of Hillel and Shammai had about Gentiles. Did you ever read that?
I do remember.
He was very specific about it. I mean, I'm not sure how he arrived there, but it was a real thing, that there was some real enmity even in Judaism about what Gentiles can, what they can do.
Right. And so there's something called the 18 enactments that theoretically was a set of legislation that was pushed through by the house of Shammai with resistance from the house of Hillel, and pushed through the Sanhedrin to safeguard a bunch of purity standards, a bunch of ritual purity standards. And these issues, when for example, when Peter goes to the house of Cornelius and he says, it's not lawful for me to eat with you, but when I saw the vision and I heard the voice, so that's where where does it say in the Torah that you can't eat with a Gentile? It doesn't, right? So instead, this is one of these enactments. And so, I think Joe Good brought that forward, and I think he might have picked that up from Harvey Falk. I'm not sure. You remember Harvey Falk's Jesus the Pharisee?
I do, yeah.
Yep.
Now I'm really confused, though, because I thought Peter's vision in Acts was that we could eat bats if we wanted to, because they came down from heaven. So now we got another podcast we got to do. I'm kidding. That wasn't about food for anyone who...
you should do a podcast on that. That would be
a good one, though.
What about the food laws? ?
Yeah. My goodness. I have a story to tell you guys. About filming Hayesod and discussing that very passage from Acts 10. Just a bizarre story, but another time.
Okay. Well, that's a definite hook to have you back.
Oh yeah, we will. Once new Hayesod comes out, we'll have to have you come tell us about it. What's good? What's been updated, improved, modified, corrected?
Yeah, it's going to be fantastic.
So, I grew up Pentecostal, right? My dad was Assemblies of God, still is, I'm sure. Assemblies of God, old school Pentecostal in a lot of ways.
This is why Jacob handles all questions related to the Holy Spirit. He's qualified for it.
Okay. Jacob, you strike me as you and Aaron Eby are the Pentecostals on staff with First Fruits of Zion. Isn't that ironic? The two guys who seem to be like, who seem more like the Vulcans among us.
Yeah, well, maybe we were compensating for something. I don't know.
Vulcans.
Yeah. So anyway, I grew up Pentecostal. So as I was reading in chapter 11, you have this beautiful, you sort of trace through the whole New Testament, where the Holy Spirit, it comes down at Acts 2, and then it seems from there mostly to only come again if someone is there who already has it. Right. And a lot of times it's laying on of hands, not always laying on of hands. Like Peter didn't touch Cornelius, but he was still there. So usually, right. I mean, I can see where the Pentecostal churches get the pattern where it's you have to, to get the Spirit, you got to go get someone who has it already to lay hands on you. Otherwise, you don't have the Spirit and you're just pretending. But looking at all these passages together, you had 10 of them that sort of this pattern seems to hold. So should I go find someone who's been to Azusa Street, or can I get the Holy Spirit just like in my room?
Well, yeah, okay. I don't think you're not wrong. That's definitely what's going on in Acts and in Ephesians. The Spirit is being transmitted through the original apostolic witnesses. It's starting with that Acts 2 experience. It's moving out from them like the flame of one lamp igniting the wick of another lamp, and one flame can ignite many lamps, and so forth. So I think that's very clear, and also clear in Ephesians as we move further into the text. I mean, but here's the premise. Paul is talking about the relationship in Ephesians between the Jewish community, specifically the apostles, as representatives of the Jewish community, of representatives of Israel, and the Gentile disciples, right? And he says, look, the apostles, prophets, teachers, pastors of the original Yeshua community, which is, the Jerusalem community, if you will, we are the vectors transmitting the Spirit to you. That's basically what you come away from Ephesians with, and you can see the pattern in the book of Acts, like you said. So I don't think there can really be much debate about that just from the textual evidence. But your question is then, well, okay, I don't have necessarily the apostolic witnesses here, the original apostolic witnesses here to zap me with the Holy Spirit. So is there some disjuncture that's happened? Is there some disjuncture between them and us, and we're no longer transmitting the Holy Spirit or something, or is there some way that it needs to be transmitted? And I don't believe that there is a disjuncture. I believe that the transmission has continued through the ages. I'm not talking apostolic succession here. I'm talking believers making believers, making believers, making believers, raising up disciples, even according to our master's instruction, to make disciples, to raise up many disciples. But this is just one of the, this is really part of this deeper mysticism. What you touched on with this question is this deeper mysticism that's running through Ephesians. I mean, Paul's not even trying to hide it. I was going to say it's hidden under the surface. It's not hidden under the surface. It's right on top. It's just like right on top, right out in front, all the way through the epistle. And so that comes through the book. I hope it doesn't scare people off, because it really is a lot of Jewish mysticism going on in this book. I hope it doesn't scare people off, because it is apostolic mysticism. And by mysticism, I mean, I just mean the way that God interacts with the universe, the whole theology of how God's Spirit interacts with his creatures. That's what we always mean by the term mysticism.
Oh, okay.
Well, and Paul, sorry, Jacob.
No. You have your glasses on, so I know you have something important to say.
I took my glasses off, so I'm just, what does that say about me?
My dad's a LASIK surgeon, so I'm not allowed to wear glasses, but it's because I'm about to be 50 that I'm wearing these glasses. Anyway, I know that the Paul, speaking of, quote, mysticism, Paul is not afraid anywhere ever to talk about the fact that we're battling these unseen forces. He makes that very clear more than I think we see in other writings later. Later, of course, we see some of that. First Peter does some of that, but he is a very spirit dude. But what's interesting is also he's always practical, but then he sort of makes this switch, and that happens in from 5 and 6. Ephesians 5, he's giving all this practical advice about husbands, love your wives, and children, you better obey your parents. Slaves, obey your masters. Masters, do the same thing to them. And all of a sudden, you better get this armor of God because the devil's after you. It's like, and that's sort of what we all think about the armor of God, is that this is our devil fighting suit, and we've got the helmet of salvation, and this I didn't know the Spirit has a sword, but it does. It's the Word of God, and it's part of the armor of God. So I guess my question is that really what that means? We're constantly putting on this armor of God suit that we can be forever in a spiritual warfare battle. Is that what Paul's saying to us, that every day we need to engage in spiritual warfare and make sure you put on the armor of God? Is that what Ephesians 6 is about?
Yeah, you know what? It really is, actually.
Okay.
It's
All right.
100% fighting
Now I
demons.
know.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Look, but here's the thing that we're missing the Jewish perspective on it. And I hope the book brings this out successfully, that it's not so much, Paul's not so much concerned about like the paranormal struggle with like these unseen enemies that are going to like leap out from the spiritual realm and try to trip you, or you know, whatever, you're going to put some hex on you or something like that. Instead, the Satan is the evil inclination. You know, it's the Satan inside that he's really concerned about. And I don't mean to diminish the actual malevolence of the spiritual forces that we are struggling against, these powers and principalities in high places that Paul speaks about, because this stuff that comes up in Ephesians 6, it's not just sort of an afterthought like, oh yeah, and look out for the devil. Instead, it really is the whole, he comes to what I would consider to be the conclusion of the entire epistle by invoking this eschatological showdown that's happening between God and the false gods of the nations. So he brings in this epic sweep of these powers and principalities that want their Gentiles back. That's the battle, because God has pulled a major heist through the redemption and stolen the Gentiles away from their gods, and the gods are ticked off and they want them back. And that's the battleground. It's the gods of the nations versus the God of Israel. And in this final battle, they want the nations to return to them and to side with them in their war against Israel and their war against the God of Israel. And that's called the war of Gog and Magog, right? Or in Revelation, we call it the war of Armageddon. So this is what Paul is invoking here in Ephesians 6. And he says, so how are we going to stand so that against these powers and principalities? You need to armor up. You need to know that you're in a fight. And the main thing that you need to be concerned about is not so much the Satan outside, it's the Satan inside. It's the evil inclination within us that's playing on our insecurities, our weaknesses, our fears, and even this identity struggle that's going on in the Gentile community, these Gentile disciples, as they're trying to reconcile their place in the scheme of things with regard to Israel and the Jewish people. So yeah, armor up.
Well, that's pretty cosmic there. It's a lot bigger than I think most people see when they read that, because it has been personalized like so much. It's just my suit.
There's nothing wrong with personalizing it, but you don't want to miss the big picture of what Paul's talking about.
Well, I feel like I'm starting to get a handle on Ephesians, but you know what? You know what, Dan? I'm having trouble with Romans and Hebrews. Do you think you can you crank out a couple more of these commentaries for us, or is that on the table? Any plans for your next commentary project, or will there be one?
Well, I mean, wow. Hebrews has been on the docket for years, because I taught through Hebrews. I've taught through Hebrews at Beth Emmanuel Messianic Synagogue. I've taught through Hebrews twice, actually. So I've got the material. I need to edit it into a commentary, and theoretically that's supposed to be next on the docket. So
that's fantastic.
I'm not going to do Romans, because Romans is Galatians. You understand Galatians, you understand Romans. It really is. So I just don't see the point. But I wish to do Corinthians. I would love to do Corinthians. That's attractive to me. That would be a lot of fun.
We're just going to visualize. We'll visualize a day when you have done a commentary for all of them, even though you say you don't want to, because you get bored.
Yeah.
You
I'm not. You began this entire segment by making a joke about how old I am, Damian. You only get so many. You only get so many years, And the truth is, I've slowed way down. Or I used to just pump out, like a lot of material, but it's not happening that fast anymore for me. The brain is
we'll call those the quantity years. Although the quality was excellent as well.
No,
but
you don't have to say that, because we all know the truth. There's a reason that I had to rewrite every single Torah club.
Well, may God continue to give you the strength to do the work that he has called you to do, whatever it might be. May your ears hear the call of God to produce these resources that are strengthening the kingdom and each of us as disciples. I appreciate you, and we're incredibly thankful to have you as part of this team. And as I said in the beginning, as a friend.
Oh, man. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
But we're not done yet.
Oh, gosh, I forgot.
Because at the end of every podcast, we like to ask our guests a few questions that we don't give them in advance. We ask the answer off the top of their head, and all we can promise is that the stakes are low.
Wait a second. You know what? You guys hit me with at least half a dozen questions that you didn't give me in advance. So.
No, but this is the rapid fire round.
Okay,
so,
all right.
So these are low stakes. These are low stakes questions. So, well, maybe not this first one. Maybe there'll be some strong opinions on this. You spend a lot of time there in Wisconsin. You got a preferred brand of locally crafted cheese?
No.
No. All right. Just take whatever comes to you. Huh?
Yeah. There is this little cheese shop near Ellsworth, Wisconsin, that every time I drive past it, I stop there. So I guess that would be it. That would be it. But I mean, it's such a high priority for me that I can't even remember the name of it off the top of my head. So,
you just went to Israel this year to do a bunch of filming, and you've been there before. For our listeners who maybe have never been to the Holy Land, tell us about your favorite meal, best food you've had in the land of Israel.
Okay. So here's the thing. When I go to Israel with Boaz, and I'm with Boaz is a foodie. He just absolutely loves to take you out to these fantastic, kosher restaurants. Almost, it's not hard to find a kosher restaurant in Israel, right? So he just loves to take you out to these different places and try this and try that. And, or like, oh, this is the best falafel in Jerusalem. You end up driving like half an hour to get a falafel or, something like this. So he does this pretty much every day. I always feel like I leave Israel, so much heavier. It's like I've actually like ingested, I've like consumed some of like the holiness has added like 10 pounds. I have 10 extra pounds of holiness on me when I leave the land of Israel. So to pick one particular thing out of all that, I'm not sure, but here's the deal. I love those Israeli breakfasts. Those that you've got this spread of salty cheeses, little salty cheese cubes, and olives, and different tomatoes and peppers and fresh salads, and all of this together. That's the thing for me. It's like that Israeli breakfast is just that. We could learn a thing or two about how to do breakfast in this country from the Israelis.
Nice. All right, third question. Do you think we'll get in your lifetime complete transparency and disclosure from the government about all these UFOs we've been seeing?
I'm glad you asked me that. Because we're really, there's some amazing stuff going on there's some amazing legislation going through Congress right now. And there's already been one round of hearings, and I anticipate that there's going to be more hearings this summer, I think it's very likely that we will reach a point of complete disclosure, because Congress is worked up, and it seems to me like they are not going to rest until they get the answers to the questions of what does the DOD have to hide? What does the Pentagon have to hide? Why have you been obfuscating and telling the American people that there's nothing to these UFO stories and so forth? And so they want answers to these questions. And I think it's very likely they're going to get the answer to the question. And I think complete disclosure is forthcoming from the Pentagon. And I even think I know what it's going to be. I think they're going to say, what? What are you talking about? I think complete disclosure is going to be, no, we have no idea what you're talking about. I'm sorry, but yeah, there's some weird stuff that we don't always know what it is flying through the sky, and we try to figure it out, and we don't know what it is. So there's your disclosure. So that's my guess. That's where I would put my money.
Nice.
Introducing Daniel Lancaster's next commentary, UFOs and the Book of Revelation. I can see it now.
Oh, yeah. You got to have that Zechariah passage about the ephod flying through the air. That's something to that, isn't there?
Ophanim, Chayot, Seraphim, I'm telling you, it's all in the Bible.
There it is.
Final question. What's your favorite variety of apple to dip in honey on Rosh Hashanah?
I'm not a person who distinguishes between varieties like that. To me, things are like apples, oranges. There's apples and there's things that are not apples, but I don't really know one type of apple from another.
Oh my goodness.
You don't have food distinction theology?
No, it's an apple.
All right. Well, that's all I got.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us for another Messiah podcast. I hope that you enjoyed this one as much as we did. It's always a pleasure to have Daniel. And if you are interested, which I hope you are after getting that little teaser from the podcast about the new book, you can go to ffoz.com and find the Holy Epistle to the Ephesians, Sermons on a Messianic Jewish Approach. I know that you will get a lot out of reading that. And as far as we go, we would love to have your 5-star reviews. To comment, subscribe to this podcast if you haven't yet, tell your friends about us, and we will see you next time. Shalom, shalom.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Messiah Podcast, where Jesus is Jewish, and that changes everything. This podcast is an extension of Messiah Magazine, available at messiahmagazine.org. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review along with a 5-star rating wherever you're listening now. Today's podcast was hosted by myself, Jacob Franzak, along with Damian Eisner. Our executive producer is Boaz Michael, and the editor-in-chief is Daniel Lancaster. This episode was directed and edited by Jeremy Schoenwald. Original music was written and performed by Joshua Aaron. The show notes for Messiah Podcast were edited by Candy Bishop and are available at messiahpodcast.org. If you are interested in learning more about the Bible from a Messianic Jewish perspective, check out Torah Club, which is an international network of small study groups who meet weekly to study the Bible together from a Messianic Jewish perspective. To start a club or join a club, go to torahclub.org. Until next time, shalom.
Let his word cover you and me, like the waters cover the sea. Let his love cover you and me, like the waters cover the sea.